This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on India, a bright spot in the global economy. The participants are Puneet Jain, economic analyst, and Gaura Dhawanlal, Akashvani correspondent. Puneetji, when we talk of India bright spot in the global economy, how big and how bright is this spot?
I think India's performance in the global economy really stands out in many aspects. But I think if you look at just the headline number, the fact that Moody's says that India is going to be among the fastest growing economy in the world, it tells you the story. And we are not a small economy. Right now, we are the fifth largest economy in the world. So if we are growing at 7% plus growth rate, then it tells you the story that we are capable of growing even at larger size. So I think this is a great achievement as a headline number. But the story behind this headline is the fact that government has taken many steps in terms of policy initiatives, in terms of economic reforms, in terms of financial inclusion, including masses in the India growth story, and the ability to deliver financial services and financial inclusion to almost everybody in the country through the use of innovative technologies, through new platforms. I think if you see this whole thing in totality, then I think it's a massive achievement. To take a country along of 1.45 billion people is not easy. It's very difficult to service such a large population, but we have been able to do it, and I would say it's a great achievement.
Right. So when we talk of economic growth, we do know that for a country that is growing, it's a good sign. It's a sign of prosperity for the country. But here we're talking at a global perspective. So one particular country, well, the largest democracy in the world and today even the most populous country, when that is doing well, how does it affect the global economics?
That's a very interesting question and perspective. So India's growth, economic growth and economic success is not good just for India. It is good for the global economy. Because India drives delivery of services to the world, India drives demand for the world, for commodities, for products and services. So India contributes to the global economy in many more ways than merely, this GDP. Because GDP, of course, tells us the story about what is being produced within the country. Most of it is, of course, consumed in India. We do export a lot. And in fact, services exports are now $33 billion every month. So you can imagine that that's a huge number. So India's contribution to global economy is also significant, not merely in terms of the goods produced, but the services delivered, the services consumed by us. And if I think economy like India, which is now the fifth largest economy in the world, if that starts growing at 7%, then we can quickly emerge into the big league, because this is exactly where China was about 16, 17 years back. They were at about $2,000 per capita income. And today, if I look at the latest numbers that we've got for the GDP at $3.5 trillion, we are slightly higher than $2,000 per annum per capita income. So I think we are really poised for it. We have that opportunity before us, and we have the capability to capitalize on this opportunity. So China grew from $2,000 to $16,000 per annum income within a space of 10, 15 years. I think we have the capability in India also to do that. So in that sense, India could be one of the major economies. My own sense is that India will be the third largest economy within the next 5 to 10 years in the world. And that's a huge, significant position.
Absolutely. So when you see the coming decade, Puneetji, and say that in the next 10 years or so, $7 to $10 trillion is a distinct possibility, right?
Yeah, absolutely. See,
right.
We are at $3.5 trillion now. And if we grow at 7%, then we will easily double in next 6 to 7 years. So I think $7 trillion to $8 trillion is very doable in next 7 to 8 years if we grow at 6 to 7%.
Right. So do you see the domestic economy being the primary engine of this growth?
Yes. In fact, interestingly, while a country like China, they grew rapidly, but the entire growth was fueled by demand from global economy. So they were export-oriented economy. And China shifted to the domestic consumption model much later. But fortunately in India, we have a very large, developed free market within our borders. So India consumes a lot of stuff. We have the purchasing power, we have the capabilities to produce advanced products, and we also have the domestic demand. So I think primarily, if you ask me, India will be driven by domestic consumption. But of course, we are trying to grow our place in the external markets through exports. Fortunately, we have very strong services exports franchise. As far as manufacturing exports are concerned, they are still in nascent stages. We know recently that some advanced companies have come to India to manufacture. So I think that's a good start. But we have a long way to go in manufacturing. But services we are doing very well. So I think overall India will be domestic driven, but we need to emphasize on exports to grow further.
So when we see a large economy or one of the largest economies vis-a-vis an equitable economy, do you see that in India, knowing that our population density is high, we do have skews internally in terms of how equitably our income is distributed, where do you think we need to make progress in the equity aspect?
So essentially, if you see large economies, a country like India, which is so geographically diverse, population-wise it is so diverse, I think the important thing is that we grow overall. So the fact that if government has larger resources, if they have more tax collections, if they have higher income from economic activity, they will be able to spend on all development activities across the country. And that is what will lift masses out of poverty. In fact, we have the data which shows that in India, people lifted out of poverty is significant now compared to many other countries in the world. So clearly, I think India's ability to utilize its resources in terms of physical infrastructure, in terms of financial resources, in terms of human resources, all that has to combine to make this distribution of wealth equitable.
So do you feel that, when India is growing exponentially like this and poised for growth, do you think regionally we will be, because we do have a lot of other developing nations within the region, smaller than India, and also looking forward to growth, do you think we can be a regional leader in the future, play a larger role in that arena?
Interestingly, if you see what has happened in last 6-7 months, in fact, about a year, a lot of regional small countries which had strong ties with other nations, they had taken loans from them or technology from them, etc. They went through a crisis, and then India emerged as a strong support for them. And not just one country, not just Sri Lanka, we saw that happen in many other countries. And India has emerged as a strong elder brother. We have been able to support their financial needs. We have been able to support their need for services, for food, for instance. So I think India has that capability to grow itself. And as India grows, a large number of countries, smaller countries in the Indo-Pacific, in the Indian Ocean region, all these countries will also grow with us because we have very close ties with these countries which are around us, which are our neighbors. And those neighbors who are willing to be part of this journey, I think this is just the beginning of the journey. Because I think in the next 10 years, we will see India emerge as a very major source of economic development for the entire region.
I think it's a very important point, Puneetji, because India itself has, over the years, we're still struggling with equity, but we've been through a tough path, on a tough road. We've seen things which other nations are experiencing. And I think the ability to just see business and economic growth beyond commerce, to see it beyond that, to see it in terms of people, to see it in terms of the future for other countries, and to say, yes, we are connected in many ways, and how can we then leverage this along with goodwill? I think that's an important point.
Yeah, and I think very, very important point, which a lot of people, a lot of discussions, they miss, is the fact that India does it democratically. See, a lot of countries have experimented with political systems which were dictatorial and they didn't work in the long term. In the long term, we saw that those systems did not deliver the welfare of the people. See, in India, we may be a bit slower. I mean, some of the countries may be faster in implementing economic changes or whatever. But the truth is that in India, because of democracy, sometimes we may appear to be growing slower, below our potential, so to say. But I think the truth is that in India, we find that welfare of the people is more important. I think that model has been junked by the global economists. And India is a democracy, I think, which is very, very important point to be underlined. And that gives us a long-term potential to grow.
I think that's an important point, Puneetji, when you're saying that we are growing, but how we see sudden growth happen and we're looking at this as an exponential growth, there is always the greater possibility of any exponential growth being a bubble. You do not see this as a bubble. What are some checks and balances that we have to ensure that it's steady and sustainable?
So when we talk about sustainable growth, 2-3 things are very important. One, of course, equitability is very important. All parts of the society, all regions of the country, they must grow. It cannot be that the numbers become large just because one particular region is growing or one particular group of people are prospering. I think in India, being a democracy, that is inbuilt into the system. Secondly, I think India has very strong institutions. Whether we look at judiciary, we look at executive, we look at media, we look at the financial system, which is very well developed, even the regulatory system. So all parts are institutionalized. They all contribute towards the growth of India. I think that is important. In many countries, you would have seen that power is so centralized that it seems to grow rapidly in the initial days, but then eventually it does not sustain. In India, because of the strong institutions of the democratic country, I think we have very good chance of sustaining this growth.
When we talk of strong institutions, what do you think are some pillars, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's our financial sector, the banking sector, which is also your area of expertise, streamlining of bureaucracy, streamlining red tape? What are some pillars on which we are actually basing this exponential growth?
Like I said, you have legislature, the political system, which is democracy. It's a free democracy, strong democracy. So that, in one sense, ensures that the growth is fair and equitable. Along with it, we have checks and balances in terms of a strong judiciary in India. Anybody who comes to India, all foreign investors, they have always spoken about the fact that Indian judiciary is absolutely independent and pretty strong, well institutionalized. So there is no challenge on that front. We have a strong media. We have very robust administrative system, whether through the administrative services or through the executive management of the country. So I think all these institutions, and lately we have seen regulatory system become very good. For example, the stock markets have grown so rapidly because of very robust monitoring or regulatory mechanism put in place by SEBI. And everybody knows that SEBI has been very fair and supportive of the markets. So clearly, I think all these things, they work together, and yet they are all independent. They're not influenced by each other. I think that is the hallmark of any strong, independent country. And we see that happening in India, really.
Absolutely. What are some areas of concern, Puneetji, or some challenges that we would probably face and might like to pre-prepare for?
So, because of our legacy issues, we have some challenges. For example, India, when I look at purely in terms of economic growth, while we have very strong services sector doing very well, a lot of employment is there, I think two areas which really need to be reformed further is one, of course, agriculture, because it still employs 60% of our population. So unless we make agriculture more remunerative and more modern, otherwise it cannot support that 60% population. That is one. Secondly, manufacturing, we are still lagging. See, we are trying to compete with countries like China. Of course, through programs like Make in India, we have a strong banking system which is now supporting credit growth in the manufacturing sector. But we need to do a lot more in the manufacturing sector, because not only because we need higher turnovers, etc., but also because manufacturing is a very good platform for employment. So I think manufacturing, which contributes only about 15% of our GDP, that needs to do much better. Government is, of course, coming out with all kinds of schemes and programs to push manufacturing. But I think a lot more will need to be done before India becomes a manufacturing powerhouse that we want.
So we've got agriculture, modernizing it, making it more remunerative, manufacturing, and yes, we're doing well in the services sector. Well, technology is changing, AI is coming in. The services sector is bound to be affected by that because it is also people intensive. What are some areas we would like to really pull up our socks on now?
So, of course, technology is going to be a constant challenge. It's kind of a treadmill, trying to keep up with technology. But fortunately, if you go back some 20 years back, when Y2K was there and everybody thought that once Y2K is over, the deployment opportunity is over, then India will not be able to compete in the global space, in the IT space and with large IT companies. But we have grown exponentially in IT space from that time. In fact, a lot of people are surprised, and I mentioned this, that Saudi Arabia's total oil exports in a year are $350 billion. And India itself exported software services of more than $350 billion last year. So India's IT services exports are now equal to oil exports by Saudi Arabia. So that is the kind of growth we have seen in India's services sector, particularly IT sector, which has done very well. I think we have the capability to grow. We have the human resources. What we need to do is cultivate more innovative environment, where companies, small startups can innovate, they can come up with new technologies. That is what has happened in countries like America, where the startups and the technology environment was very positive. I think we will do it. I'm just underlying what we need to do. But I think government is more than aware of it. And we have seen large number of initiatives which are really directed towards this goal.
Without doubt. And we have pleasantly surprised many global economy watchers through the years in the past, and I'm sure we will continue to do so. Thank you, Puneetji, for joining us on the program today.
Thank you so much.
You were listening to a discussion on India, a bright spot in the global economy. The participants were Puneet Jain, economic analyst, and Gaura Dhawanlal, Akashvani correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on Air. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on Air Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 928-909-5 4044.